Hi, I'm Faizal.
And I'm Adi.
And welcome to another episode of ANF Podcast.
Actually, it's called LiveJam. Oh,
Is it?
Like, the whole thing is called ANF Podcast, but ANF Podcast is made up of like a few programs and like our usual weekly kind of like talk about the arts and the industry. That one is known as the LiveJam.
So this is, yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our live jam.
Season 1, Episode 3.
Yes. Episode 3. So anyway, for this episode, we'll be talking about the arts by whom and for whom. And this topic came about when we attended the ARTS NMP nomination town hall, which happened recently. And during that town hall, we kind of talked a bit about the candidates and what they stand for. And basically, it got us thinking about, the arts, like who are making art and who is it for. And, with this whole pandemic thing and going into 2021 when things are getting a bit better, like what's next, for the arts. And yeah, so
and also partly I think we wanted to talk about like who are the arts for, because of that recent article that came out which labeled the artist or the arts maker being a non-essential. So like then we were thinking about like what then is the function of art, and like who is it intended and who is it therefore intended for.
Yes. So maybe to begin this discussion, we can talk about who are the arts makers and creators. To me, the art makers and the creators are basically people who are in the arts, people who are dancers, who are actors, who are musicians, who are in the fine arts, you are graphic artists and all of that. And in theatre, you could think about positions like, creative producers, directors, playwrights, actors, costume designers, lighting designers, stage managers, and all of that. So basically, these are the people who, people who come together to create a show, create an art form, to put together something for the people to watch.
Actually, you mentioned something about the creative producers. I think that is a very controversial kind of term that have been coined, partly because I think there were a lot of like debate about like what exactly a creative producer does, because like technically when you think about like the creator of the work, like people who actually create, like who were involved in the initial stages of creating the work, shouldn't they already be considered as like the creative producers? But in recent time, I think there were also a lot of debates about like how some producers, they see themselves as creative producers because they, instead of just bridging that gap between the artists and like the possible sponsors or like bodies that commission the work, they are also responsible in giving like inputs to kind of like direct the work in a way that will suit certain possible sponsors or organizations that commission the work.
Basically, the paymaster.
The paymasters. So they are involved in that whole process of like, turning that objective, or turning the scope towards those possible sponsors and what do you call that, the paymasters. Yes.
So all this talk about creating works, creative works. Maybe Adi could talk a little bit about your process about making theatre. Like from the beginning, the end-to-end process, and maybe you can talk about like what are the challenges that you face, and when you intended to do a production, like do you think a lot about like what is this show about and who is this show for? Along those lines.
Okay, when I create work, the first thing that will always come to mind is where am I going to stage it? Because if I'm going to stage it in like a space within Singapore, I must be prepared to actually pay a couple of thousands for like just a simple black box setting, kind of like venue in Singapore, and usually if you talk to any performance arts creators, they will always tell you that venue itself will be enough to kill you financially because it's been kind of like put out there with a very high rental rates. So if you're not able to even like, pay for the rental of a venue where you can perform, then it is going to be hard for you to even create the work and stage it up and put it up to stage or put it up to the audience. So venue is one thing. The next thing that I'll be thinking about is like how much do I want to charge per ticket per audience, because ultimately when you hire actors, when you hire like all these different creative
The
collaborators,
production crew and all.
yeah, you will need to pay them, and you need to pay them enough to make sure that they too have enough to kind of like put food on the table. So those two components, I think they are the ones that will take up most of your kind of like
Production
budget,
budget.
production budget, and like when I did my calculation, right, usually like those two components will add up to about like close to 8K to 10K, depending on how much you pay your actors and your directors and your script writer. Then of course you will know for sure, even if you were to run your show for like 5 days, the chances of you to break even is really tough in Singapore. So you will therefore need to like lean on fundings from like organizations like the National Arts Council or like the Tote Boards or MCCY, National Youth Council, because those funding bodies are the one that ensure that you will at least be able to break even after you paid all your rental fees, your actors, and your creatives. Then of course when you apply for fundings for all these different like from all these different organizations, they will always ask you like, who is your target audience, what do you intend to do with your work, what are the main objectives, and you will always have to go with like the bigger picture, like how it might change society, like their perception, their ideology, the way they kind of like do things on a day-to-day basis. So you always have to aim for that kind of thing, and you need to skew your perception, or rather skew your work towards a targeted group. You can't say like I'm going to target like from like primary school to say the older generations, because a lot
Too
of
wide.
a lot of the times the kind of topics that you choose to talk about within your artwork will not be able to hit everyone across those like age group or like gender divide and things like that. Not gender divide, like both genders.
Yes.
Yes, you will be.
Encompassing all.
Yeah, encompassing both all
Boy,
spectrum.
girls, non-binary, and what is there out there lah, basically.
Yeah, so when you apply for fundings, the organizations or the funding bodies will always ask you all these questions like, who are your target audience and stuff. So as an arts creator, because you are so rather you need to lean on these funding bodies, therefore whenever you create art, you can't help yourself but to think about like your intended audience. Yeah.
Right. So when we talk about intended audience, it's a very important thing because like when we ask for fundings, when we even ask for funding for non-government bodies, basically you go to like to a bank or some other kinds of foundation, they would be interested in how we are spending this money and who we are spending it on, and basically they become our paymasters, and we as the creator of an artwork, we need to be very very careful how we want to craft the work, because we are accountable, to these people who have funded the money to us.
Basically, they would want to also like
Basically they have a responsibility.
they need to justify
Yes.
what do they get in return from all those fundings. Yeah, so that becomes something that is very tricky. Also, because you're always thinking about like a certain targeted audience, then ultimately, at certain points of time, let's say if you have created work over like a couple of years, chances are your work will then be very specific to a certain group of people, and then there's also then the whole question about like inclusivity becomes an issue. Yeah.
So basically when you talk about inclusivity, right? Yeah, so it's very hard to create an artwork ideally that reaches out to every single demographics. It's very hard because what we want to tackle in the maybe a theater show, it's kind of it's going to be very very difficult because then it becomes too wide, and then the story becomes too long. I don't know. Maybe when you want to encompass a lot of things in one show, then what are we trying to achieve? Like, then the show becomes too confusing to me personally.
No, but okay, because like if you were to think about like some artists, they say that they create their work organically, so they produce it based on what they feel at that particular point of time, rather than like, oh, who should I target my work at? Then my question to this whole process of like thinking about your target audience would be, would the process then be genuine and organic?
I guess that depends on the creative development of the work, because when you think about creating something, you know what you tend to lean towards. And for you, Adi, I know you lean towards doing Malay folk tales and folklore for children, and we do a lot of pantomimes. So, as a person who create art, you need to know yourself, like what you're good at, and basically it comes with the knowledge, it comes with the passion and the interest. So I feel like you already know who is your target audience, because based on what is your passion and what is your interest. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, uh, I guess that's because like of my background, like I'm involved in education, and like I've always been interested in creating works for children. But what I'm saying is, what if like you have artists who don't have a particular targeted audience, but they just want to produce work because they feel what they feel at that point of time, then
I don't see any problem with that. Then I guess that's when you feel like your work could reach out to a different kind of target audience. Because when you think about you want to do something else other than what you're passionate about or you have very strong interest in, then I guess you have detoured from your normal target audience. Then you need to clearly define that target audience. Who is this show for? Like, yeah, it's not something that you have been doing a lot, but you suddenly have this idea, right? You want to do a project that is different from what you do. Maybe for you, Adi, like we've always done pantomime. Maybe you want to do something more serious. Maybe you want to reach out to a different target audience. Maybe the topic you want to talk about is not for students in primary school or secondary school. Maybe it's for teenagers, maybe 18 and above, or 18 to 25. You already know, like, oh, this topic will hit home to this group of people.
No, actually, my question was more of like um, creating art for the sake of creating art, like without having to burden yourself.
Okay.
Think about like the returns, like what do you get out of it, like what do you achieve out of it, rather than thinking about all that. You just create art because it gives you joy, it gives you that feeling of like fulfillment which other things wouldn't be able to do, like for example, like if you're a computer engineer, you know that doing all the codings and stuff will bring you the money, but then like you wanted to explore something else and you find maybe painting give you joy, give you a sense of fulfillment that your ordinary job wouldn't be able to give you. Then how about that, like how about like those people who just create work because it gives them joy, it gives them that sense of fulfillment? Because in Singapore, to do like a performance, for example, is going to be quite expensive. Then of course you wouldn't be able to just jump into it and like say, oh, I'm doing this because it gives me fulfillment. At the end of the day, you how do you then justify this sense of fulfillment that you get as an individual by paying like close to 10,000 for like a venue for like your actors to bring your dreams and vision to life? Then how do you even justify that? Especially when everything in Singapore is so expensive. Like if you're paying 10K to do this particular production without just cause you want to do that production, then you obviously that 10K you're giving up, and you can use it to like maybe like for your own life sustenance or like to pay your mortgage or something. Yeah, that's what I mean by like the whole idea of like producing work without having to think about your targeted audience or like what you get in returns and your ROI and all those stuff. But at the same time, without having to worry that by creating this work you will be starving yourself or like preventing yourself from getting your usual daily needs. Yeah.
Because I come from a marketing background, so the ROI is very, very important to me, even when it comes to publicity, even comes with budget and finance.
Yeah, I totally understand that, but what I'm saying is that like, is there a way like we can figure out, because our topic is to talk about like arts, who made it and for whom is it intended. But what if there's a particular artist who just wanted to create art because it gives themselves a sense of fulfillment, but because of like the whole how this whole system works, like to get like venues, to get like places where you can do your art forms, can be quite expensive, and you need to lean on like certain organizations to kind of like fund your projects. Then is there a way we can work out whereby the artists don't even need to be burdened by like, oh, targeted audience, what do we get in return and stuff like that? I'm actually like more of going towards that whole idea of like, could we make the whole process of creating art more affordable for everyone, so that the artists no longer get burdened by all the economical baggage that comes with producing the work.
That's a very good point. I guess when you think from that perspective, like you want to create art because you just have a moment of brilliance, or you have a very good idea, and you just want to create that idea before you lose it.
It's just the creating arts for the sake of creating arts.
So I guess then you still need in your team of theater makers or art makers, creators, you still need somebody who is able to lay down the foundation of this project. So basically, somebody who can think about the feasibility of this project, and I guess networking helps. So if you're somebody who has a lot of contacts, you have a lot of resources, you know people who can help you, then I guess you can make it happen. But if you're going to talk about maybe from uh, a more governmental approach, a more bureaucratic approach to creating art for somebody who just want to create art for the sake of creating, then I guess there needs to still be a system in place where uh, art creators, art makers can go to kind of seek help, and maybe there is a fund, there's a pool of money somewhere, maybe in MCCY or NAC, where these producers or these creators, directors or playwrights or dancers or what have you, they can go to and tell the government body like, okay, I have this idea and this is my proposal, and uh, I want to seek funds. So then you as the creator, then you have to work together with that person who lays down the foundation, right? To help you think about the feasibility of the project and how you're going to get resources.
Yeah, but I was thinking, right, because of how like everything was systematically put in place, we as an artist, like, I don't think we are even allowed to put like works and present it within our own like HDB flat, for example. I was thinking along the line, like, if you could actually like put up performances and like get people to come over to your house to watch that particular performance, then you wouldn't have to like spend so much to like, rent a venue per se. And that alone would be able to like save you a lot of money. Like we're talking about like 5K and above. So what I'm saying is like, or what I'm hoping or wishful thinking is that for us to be able to put up works in our own private space, like a HDB, our own HDB houses, and instead of like having to kind of like rent out a venue. I mean, like, yeah, people might say that, oh, then you have to think about the noise control and things like that. But the thing is, right now, because of the rules in place, we are not allowed to actually like create work or like performances in our own HDB houses. Yeah.
I guess that's a very sensitive topic to talk about, because when we talk about using public spaces, like HDBs are actually public housing, and they come with their own set of rules. I suppose that there are only certain things that are allowed. Like if you have your own bungalow, you have your own terrace, you want to make a show, you want to invite people, yeah, by all means, it's because it's a private property and you can do whatever with it. If people don't complain, then then you can run your business as it is.
Then that begs the question of like art, who is it for and who makes art? Then if you were to think back, because you talk about like private buildings, owning private houses, then that begs the question of like, is arts then only for the privileged, people who can afford to make and people who can afford to enjoy?
That is another very good question. I feel like art is not for the privileged, but I feel like the creating of the art, the producing of the art is, if you come from a privileged background, then yes,
Because
it's
like
easier for you to,
yeah, because I've kind of like identified that to make art, because like I say, like the venue and everything, like for you to practice the art itself, it can be quite costly. And then because it can be quite costly, you tend to have to like lean on like organization that does funding. And because of that, the whole process is always burdened with like, oh, target audience, objective, what do I get in return of that, instead of just creating art for the sake of creating art because it fulfills you as a human being. Then you talked about like how or rather I talked about how like, if there were like certain things being put in place, like for example, like if we were to be allowed to create art within our own like HDB houses, whereby we invite audience to come into our HDB house to like watch a performance,
Actually, it's been
that
done.
that would actually help us to cut down like a few of the costings, right? Then you said that a lot of the times, like people who create arts and they want to do it in their own homes, it has to be a private homes. Then that begs the question of like, is arts only meant for the privileged?
Actually, talking about HDB, actually, there is an arts exhibition that's happening that we two HDB houses in somewhere in Singapore. I don't know, Tiong Bahru or is it Toa Payoh? They converted two HDB unit into an art exhibit, and they have some people like children and some people to kind of uh, I don't know, they kind of present their work there.
Yeah, but you see, those places where like the two places that were chosen, who chose it? Is it the artist or is it the organization that was involved with the funding?
Actually, I'm not so sure about that. Like, I think I would need to read up more about how that project came about. But I thought that's an interesting way to kind of reach out to, because it's done in a HDB setting. And I think it reaches out to more Singaporeans because most Singaporeans live in HDB. Not all Singaporeans live in like landed property. And having a show done within a HDB flat makes sense to me.
Yeah, it makes sense to me too. But then I think there were so many restrictions and red tape being put in place that it's almost impossible for you to do it unless if you are able to convince certain people from the organization that does the funding to actually allow you to do it, which is quite unfortunate actually, because then like again it goes into a cycle, right? If you were to go to
The
this
objective is different.
yeah, if you were to go to this organization that does the funding, then you have to think about target audience, and rather than just creating
Yes.
art for the
Actually-
sake of creating
Actually,
art.
you had to kind of forego your idea when you come to. Maybe you have a very good idea, and then you go to, an organization, a government body, and you ask for funds, and your project may be taken, but it may have evolved into something, not what you're looking for. Especially things like arts in your neighborhood where they have arts exhibitions and some other things that happens in the void deck that
Mhm.
happened like maybe 3-4 years ago.
I think it's still happening right now.
And I thought that was a good concept, but I think it hasn't gone anywhere. Like it hasn't led to anything bigger than what it was 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the times people still have this perception that arts is only for the privileged ones, people who actually can afford to practice the arts. Because okay, let's say if we are not even talking about like venues and stuff, we know that the cost of living here is so high to the point that you will not be able to kind of like sustain yourself if you don't work like with payments that is high enough. Then if you like kind of like earn the average income, chances are you might have to take up like 2 or 3 jobs at a time. So there isn't really a time for you to kind of like practice art or enjoy arts. So people who practice arts or enjoy arts, then my question would be, where would the income come from for them to sustain themselves in a country where cost of living is so high? I mean, like if you were to like talk about like maybe our neighboring countries, right, whereby sometimes the farmers, they kind of like have time to kind of practice their arts because they don't really have that high cost of living, and therefore like they just need to produce enough for them to kind of like get by day. Then with the extra time they can practice the arts. But I don't think it is even possible here, because while you're practicing your arts, where would your money come from?
Do you think then, you talk about different art forms.
I don't have an answer for that.
You can cut that off, don't worry. So anyway, when you were talking about the arts, right, and like how it's been presented, like produced in like versus HDB or maybe very heavily funded to a more privileged type of production, you know, where can be staged in Esplanade or where what have you. So maybe my thoughts on this is that then maybe we should, is there a is this a good time then to think about, you know, what is art in Singapore? Like we define art in a Singapore context.
To me, I think you could define what is art in Singapore context. But then again, with anything that is produced in Singapore or done in Singapore, there's always this like price tag attached to it, right? Like we will always have to think about the economical sense, because ultimately it's all about like your own life sustenance as an artist. How do you sustain yourself? And this whole idea of like sustain and sustenance have been an issue that have been discussed about for many years, but no one have yet to come up with like that perfect solution for, like, let's say for me, who a person who is born in a low income family, how then do I get myself to a comfortable level whereby I can practice my arts without having to worry about like where is my next meal coming from? Yeah, so I think the first step to like talking about like arts and the definition of art in Singapore, I think, is to first of all think about how then do artists sustain themselves without having to lean on other organizations or like other bodies for funding.
I guess when you talk about arts in Singapore, funding will always be the number one factor. You know, it's the number one. This it's like a it's a very important thing to think about when you create art in Singapore is the funding. Even like if you talk about the like theatre companies in Singapore, right? They still rely very much on NAC for fundings. And like you have mentioned before, then what is the arts in Singapore without NAC, like without this funding? Then who or what is art in Singapore?
Yeah, precisely. And also okay, so we've talked about people who created art. Then we talk about like people whom we kind of like want our work to be consumed by or engaged with, right? A lot of the times when you put up an artwork of because we talk about life sustenance, so one of the way you can sustain yourself as an artist is to put a price tag to your artwork for people to consume or people to enjoy or people to interact with. Then my question is, those people who interact with your artwork, who consume your artwork, they will then have to pay a certain amount of money. And like, because the cost of producing it is so high, you therefore have to charge an equally high price tag for your art piece. Therefore, when a person wants to consume or like wants to enjoy this work of art, for example, they will have to consider paying a hefty amount. And if this person is not well-to-do enough, they will have to consider and weigh out their options of like, oh, do I spend $25 on a theater tickets, or do I spend this $25 on like 5 meals? Then of course, when such considerations come into place, we can't avoid having that conversation whereby people will be asking, who is the arts actually intended for? Is it really for people with low to middle income, or is it like really meant for the privileged? And then again, it comes to the whole idea of like, oh, but there are like bodies who will help you to kind of like subsidize your tickets and stuff. But in order for that body to come in to subsidize the tickets, the producer will first of all have to write in to these people who are willing to subsidize the tickets for them to agree on it. But in order for them to agree on it, again, the producer will have to justify who is the intended audience. What do you want to do with your artwork? What do you hope to achieve at the end? Again, it comes with a lot of explanation and a lot of like paperwork. So it's really like, ultimately at the end of the day, if I am a person who is not involved in the arts, or have no idea how the process is like, I will always and forever be thinking arts is actually for the privileged and it's only meant for the rich.
One point you made about the ticket prices, right? I find that it's always like when we do our shows, it's always a challenge, to kind of decide or make a decision on what ticket price you want to put. Like, is it too expensive? Is it too cheap? And then we have to weigh with the production cost and all of that. Like, it's a very tedious process where you have to really sit down and kind of decide, who is our show for, and is our ticket price too expensive for this target audience? Or
I can tell you safely, without any fundings, right, from any like organizations or like funding bodies, if you were to charge your tickets $25 per audience, and let's say if you do your shows or performances at a black box setting, $25 per ticket, in those black box setting, you can only fit in about 100 to 200 audience members. You times that, so 25 times 200, so you get about 5,000 per show. That 5,000 per show is definitely not enough to break even for you to pay your creatives, for you to pay your venue, for you to pay the technicians and all those marketing posters. Not enough.
Then it would then mean that as an arts creator, then you would have to have some form of money, your own savings, or a pool of money where you can find like resources, like maybe you have friends or family who want to help fund your project.
Yeah, either that or you can push your ticket price higher, like say you push it to $40, but chances are if you put it at $40 and you are an unknown organization or an unknown collectives or unknown artist, you wouldn't be able to sell your tickets. And even then, when you sell your tickets, right, like say you sell it at $40, then you have to also think about like all the other factors, like for example, like will your audience be able to afford to pay? And then if you're targeting, if like for me, I'm targeting like school students, of course $40 they will never be able to pay for
Schools will
it,
not pay for their students either at
unless
$40.
if you're from some privileged
schools with arts funding where there's like an endless amount of money, probably.
Yeah. Or like a privileged household, and you are given say like pocket money, $100 per week kind of thing. Even $100 per week, I think is still quite a struggle if you are going to pay $40 for a performance ticket.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I guess a question we can pose to our listeners is that, what are your thoughts on, the arts, like for whom and by whom? Like, all these struggles that we have talked about, like, do you face the same struggles? Do you face the same issues and problems? And maybe you have your thoughts on how you have tackled certain issues yourself that you would like to share, we would love to hear about them.
Yes.
Yep. So I guess we would end our live jam session at this juncture because we could talk on and on and on about this. But I guess it's more about sharing of knowledge. Like we have shared with you our struggles and our thoughts on the art scene in Singapore. Maybe you will want to share your experience in the arts in Singapore. So we will love to hear about them. So you can just drop us a DM, or you can call us, or you can DM us. Like if you know our numbers and email address, just go ahead.
Yeah, otherwise you can actually just leave a comment on the YouTube channel, because for our live jams we don't only put our recordings on Spotify or like iTunes. You can actually find the recording on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, which is the A.D.I concept channel. So from there, you can actually leave a comment and we will get back to you as quickly as we can.
Thank you, everyone. We'll be back soon. Bye bye.
Bye.